let's explore whether we're overestimating Russia, underestimating Russia, how resilient is the Russian economy, and how effective will Russia continue to be at finding enablers in its war of aggression. We have a panel of excellent distinguished speakers, and it will be moderated by Max Sedon, Chief of the Financial Times Moscow Bureau. Max, over to you.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'm Max Sedon. I'm the Moscow Bureau Chief of the Financial Times, which is although I live right here in Riga, so it's a funny title these days. I say it's like being the king of Yugoslavia. You know, my role hasn't changed, but the way I do my job is quite different these days. We have a excellent panel for you here, and talking about the threat that really has dominated this conference, which is Russia. We're 2.5 years into the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and you could certainly argue that Vladimir Putin has really never looked as confident in Russia's success as he has now. Russia is advancing on the battlefield. It has a huge advantage in manpower and firepower over Ukraine. And even though the West has taken unprecedented steps with sanctions to try to stop Russia's ability to fight the war, Putin seems to have made this calculation that he can outlast the West and win the war. And he has been able to spend enormous sums of money on recruiting people to fight in the war and to spend on arms for the Russian war effort. The Russian defense budget for next year is going up 25% to a record $178 billion. And his opponents are all in jail or dead. The economy is growing. He looks pretty secure. And of course, the title of this panel is Russia cracking under pressure? And in journalism, we have a rule that if there is a headline in your question, the answer is pretty much always no. But maybe this will be the exception, because we know that there are many vulnerabilities in the Russian system. They are sustaining really absurdly high casualties, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of killed and wounded. The estimates range all the way up to 1 million. They are having to increase the size of the payouts to get people to fight in the war because they're having problems with recruitment. There are indications that even though they have a big firepower advantage over Ukraine, sanctions are starting to cut into their ability to produce more weapons. And even though the economy is booming now, there's another event going on simultaneously in Moscow, the Moscow Financial Forum, where my invite must have got lost in the mail, but the officials from the central bank, the finance ministry have all been saying, who are speaking there, they have been saying openly for quite some time that there are a lot of underlying problems with the economy. Inflation is running at 19%, and it's just not sustainable. We're also seeing signs of elite infighting. There's a big struggle over assets. Just last week, a governor declared a blood feud on a senator and two members of parliament, which is not something that you normally see in a thriving, secure system. So I'd like to start with Pavel Baev. He's a research professor at the Oslo Peace University. Let's start with the battlefield, the war effort. How sustainable is Russia's advance on the battlefield? They are moving forward. Last weekend, they advanced about 100 kilometers in Kursk region, which is of course in Russia. They're taking more settlements in the Donbass in Ukraine, but it's taking really enormous expenditures of men and materiel for them to do this. How sustainable is this, and how are we seeing the Russian army change and adapt as it fights this war?
All right, let me start with a word of appreciation and a word of congratulation. Appreciation goes to the organizers of the conference. Very interesting venue. We are surrounded by history, and we are discussing history in the making. Congratulations go to the colleague from Israel. with a very important meeting of leadership of Hamas and Hezbollah. They're having quite a party in the dark corner of hell. Well done. As for your question on the kind of Russian military and its successes and how sustainable they are, it is a question on which no definite answer can be given. And I don't think Russian generals know. The army they are leading now is not at all the army they started the war with. Not at all the army they were building for a decade through painful reforms, through a lot of investment, which was supposed to be a compact, professional, and well-equipped and able absolutely to perform special military operations, like the one in Crimea. Shockingly effective. What the army they are having now is entirely different, and they are quite unfamiliar with the kind of structures, with the force reproduction. They have very little idea about how the defense industrial complex works, what they're able to produce. They see all the kind of shortages. They see the generals in Moscow. They see all the problems, and they don't have any idea about the path to victory. We discussed at the previous session Ukrainian path to victory, which is a very difficult one. In Russia, there is no path to victory at all. It's a path of permanent war. And I'm not sure the army there is now is capable of this permanent war. It is really cracking under pressure, as was the title of our session. There are many cracks, certainly under, Ukrainian army is cracking under pressure. We are quite reluctant to discuss that, certainly, but as far as Russian military are concerned, there are kind of three key components which kind of define now this army: corruption, criminalization, and Sovietization. We know about corruption from kind of data about kind of Russian Defense Ministry. The new team which is coming to replace them is no less corrupt. The difference is they are much less of a team. Shoigu, with all his problems, issues, vanity, is a very good team builder. He cannot do anything of this sort in Security Council, but Belousov is not a team builder at all. In his ministry, it's every crook for himself or for herself. As far as criminalization is concerned, we saw a year and something ago the Wagner Group as a very kind of strange, odd formation inside the Russian military, kind of entirely separate from everything else, very mutinous, rebellious. Now it's the end of the group, but the bacillus, the infection from that group is now spread through the ranks. How the army goes with its recruitment, how it fights, is very clearly signaled. There is no professionalization at all. Criminalization is going through and through, and many generals are entirely shocked by this trend, for what I am able to get from the Telegram channels. And Sovietization means that they are falling back on old Soviet patterns of amassing troops, of kind of going forward no matter what the cost. And that pattern is entirely unsustainable. Soviet Union was able to generate the mass of tanks, of artillery, of manpower. Russia is not. It is still kind of an effort which is fundamentally unsustainable. We don't know how many square kilometers this offensive will yield. We probably know that they will be able to kind of push Ukrainians out of the Kursk region, which again was an operation that reached some goals, but it was never intended to last forever. But the sustainability beyond the next year, from the military point of view, is incredibly problematic, while from the political side, the war must go on.
Thank you very much, Pavel. Now I'd like to turn to Dirk Schäuble. He's the head of the Russian division at the European External Action Service, and I'd like to ask about Western efforts to try to create this pressure to make Putin crack. These unprecedented sanctions that have really been this great geoeconomic experiment in what you can do to stop a nuclear power from waging a war. And how we are 2.5 years into the war. On the one hand, the Russian economy is certainly rebounded. On the other hand, you can just listen to what they say themselves. Imports are down, according to the Russian economy ministry, 8% so far this year, mostly because of Western pressure on banks to stop processing payments from Russia. What is your assessment of how the sanctions have affected Russia's economy and society and ability to wage this war?
Thank you very much, and very glad to be on that panel. Let me start maybe by saying I'm often asked whether the EU has a strategy on Russia, and the answer is we have one, but we don't call it strategy. We have a wartime approach since February 22, in which we have adapted our policy and basically skipped the part on reaching out to some parts of the Russian leadership or government. So the number one priority there is support to Ukraine, the number one priority of our Russia strategy, if you want, of our wartime approach. And I don't repeat now all the different items of this wartime approach, but one is indeed sanctions, and sanctions is, that is also important to understand, a part of this toolbox. It's not something on its own that we pursue, and we also do not have the ambition to want to bring Russia to their knees, to the economy, etc. But the main purpose of our sanctions is to cut the financing as much as possible of the war machinery, so that Russia has no or less funds available to finance its war of aggression against Ukraine. That's the main purpose. Have we achieved our goal? I think it's the classic example of glass half full or glass half empty. I would say the glass is half full. We have managed through 14 packages of sanctions quite a bit. Russia had to reorient their whole trade system. They moved to the east, basically. I just read the other day that now 80% of Russia's energy exports go to either China or India, away from us. They had to find restitution. They had to reconcile their policies. So there's hardly any foreign direct investment anymore due to the sanctions. That we should also say. We have seen a shift in the Russian economy, of course, to the defense side, plus 25% in next year's budget, if I'm correctly informed. I read the other day that altogether 40% is spent in the Russian budget now on either defense or security policy related issues, enormous amounts, which is also due to the sanctions, because they have to spend more money to find the parts that they need, dual use products, etc., from other sources. Now let me also say where our restrictions are on the sanctions policy. We have a number of restrictions. We want to make sure that our own industry, our own economies are suffering the least from these sanctions. So that is sometimes forgotten. So we cannot do everything as we wish to do. We have to make sure that our industries suffer the least possible. Secondly, we have excluded also some areas, such as the food and agriculture area, from sanctions. Why? Because we want to make sure that what we call the global south, that countries, third countries which are absolutely dependent on deliveries of agricultural products, including from Russia, that they can continue getting delivered the goods that they have received so far. So we believe that maybe the sanctions are not, the effect of the sanctions is not fully visible right now, but we do believe that the policies and the economic situation in Russia cannot sustain this for the long term. We are sure that in 2-3 years, with all the deficiencies that I already mentioned, we will see a clearer crack in the system, and that is why also we have to stand fast. We are in the middle of the preparations of the 15th package. We have also, you might have seen, started having added some Iranian officials and Iranian companies on the list, also as a result of circumvention or violation of sanctions, of our sanctions. So that is also an approach. We have in the past already put some Chinese companies on the list. All of this will continue. So we are hopeful that with our sustained efforts with further packages, hopefully we will bring Russia to at least some more reason when the situation in the country will deteriorate.
Thanks. Some really interesting, you mentioned China and India, which I definitely want to get to later. But first, I'd like to ask about another aspect of the sanctions, which is the Russian elite. If you look at these, lists of these senior Russian officials and oligarchs who were sanctioned, I don't think I'm wrong to say that the hope was that the being sanctioned would get these people, many of whom they have houses in France, yachts in the Mediterranean, children at school in Switzerland, that they would rise up and they would tell Putin to stop the war. And we really haven't seen this. At least outwardly, they are very much rallying around the regime. So I have a question for Marie Mendras, who's a professor at Sciences Po University in Paris, a very long time Russia expert. How do you see the elite reacting to the pressures of this war? Because at least in my conversations with some of the people who are on these lists, certainly not all of them were happy about the war, but pretty much uniformly they've just about all gone along with it, and it's been a real asset to the regime. How do you see them adapting to life under sanctions and under all this Western pressure?
Thank you, Max. First, I'd like to also join Pavel Baev in the appreciation of the organization of this conference and this particular panel, which is, at long last, to study the major player in this war, which is Russia and the men that are waging this war or are suffering all the hardships of this insane war of aggression, of destruction. Because we keep sort of talking about what Putin says, sort of how much, how many miles they may have, and we don't talk about the most important factor in this war. And I'd like to build on what Pavel said earlier and debunk the myth about the many successes of the Russian army. I mean, it's a succession of mistakes and of defeats if we think politically and strategically and also economically, right? So we have to stop conveying the official Russian message. And we have to stop talking to a few sources in Moscow, St. Petersburg, of people who continue to live very well and sometimes even better. Because there is no economic growth. There is an economic boom because it's a war economy. And I'll leave that maybe to Arkady and others to say more about also the exhaustion of this war economy that I think we're going to see coming. The Russians are exhausted. This war is exhausting the country. It has finally killed all the public institutions in Russia. People that still watch television are fully disinformed. And then some people have this strange idea of knowing what those millions of people think, or even to imagine that they support the war. I mean, let's be serious. I'm a scholar, a researcher, and we just keep building this mythology to give sense to what Putin is doing. Let's start with the fact that what he's doing is senseless. And he is the man who made the decision in February 2022 against the advice of his military commanders and the members of the Security Council. So you can imagine what the situation inside those ruling elites, the Siloviki, the army commanders, the oligarchs, the energy sector, and I know Pavel can say more about it. They've been drawn into this battle that is beyond them, completely. And that is completely out of proportion. Also, what is important is that both the ruling elites, the non-ruling elites, which I think we need to talk about to answer your question, and society at large, if we can still talk of a society, is that war was started with a big lie, that it was not a war and just a quick spetsoperacja, okay? So a big lie. Then it started with major military defeats in Kiev Oblast and, in other parts, right? This war started as a very criminal war to the beginning. Now they can't mobilize more, so they send, felons, they send conscripts that are not trained, which that already Pavel said. The people inside Russia, whether high up or just the ordinary folks, they have not been told what the aims of this war are. And they're paying with their lives or with the future of their kids, right? And now, nobody is telling them what are the peace aims. To conduct a war, to give your life for a war where there is no peace objective. Putin never talks about what he wants at the end. He doesn't want peace, as was already said. He needs war, internal war and external wars, to survive. So these people are caught into this tunnel of war, and nobody tells them when the exit will be possible. So those professional elites, I think we have a direct influence on them. Non-ruling elites, not the black, the black clans over there. They live in total insecurity. They know that someday the regime will fall. They know they cannot win anything in Ukraine long term. And they are very much under the impact of sanctions, but not only sanctions, of the fact that there is no future for them in a Russia that would still be, in one way or other, Putinist, corrupt, oligarchic. To conclude on this, I would say we underestimate the disarray and the fear in the various populations of the Federation of Russia.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'd like to turn to Arkady Milman, who's a former Israeli ambassador to Russia, and talk about what I think is a very important aspect of why Russia has been able to keep going. It's because it's been able to get around the sanctions and draw on the resources of some of its sanctioned allies. We've seen North Korea. Just yesterday, Zelensky said that North Korea has sent 10,000 men to help aid in the war effort. We're still waiting for more detail on that. But really the most glaring example is Iran, which has sent drones. More recently, it's begun sending missiles, and these alliances are not just helping Russia win the war, but they're also changing Russia's influence in regions outside the battlefield in Ukraine, and the Middle East is the most obvious example of that. So how do you see this support that Russia has been able to muster contributing to the war effort, and how important has this been in allowing Putin to keep going?
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great honor to me to be here. I will be a bit provocative, and I think that we have a problem with this issue. First of all, I'm really frustrated, but Russia will not disappear.
Why would we want Russia to disappear?
No, because...
We're talking of a regime.
No, that's... what is regime, yes? It's a collective Putin. It's not one person that decides. All Russian elites, very loyal elites. The last case was Khodorkovsky, that's all. But all of them, including Mikhail Friedman, he returned to Russia. All of them do business. And for them, war, it's a huge profit. We have to remember it. In spite of some critics of Deripaska, one of the oligarchs, he still earns a lot of money. And this is one issue. Second, sanctions. Sanctions is a very good instrument, but there was only one country, South Africa, that suffered from sanctions, but it wasn't a key factor for dissolution of apartheid regime. It's one of instruments. We can look at Iran, North Korea. Iran, for example, it's around 40 years under sanctions, more than 40 years under sanctions. And what? The regime collapsed? No. It's also, we have to understand that what we need with sanctions, a mechanism to enforce these sanctions. We don't have still, not in EU, not in US, a special mechanism. It's a very, very hard and difficult work because it's a bureaucracy. We have to monitor everything. It's human resources, it's technology resources. But look, I will give you a small example. For example, Lithuania, one of the Baltic countries. In the 2023, Lithuanian companies earn a lot of money of the business with Russia. Still, there are a lot of Western companies that we see a technological components in missiles, in Iranian missiles, that Russians use against Ukraine. Still, what is sanctions? It's good, but it's not enough. Not in long run. It's like, you know, it's like obsession with sanctions. 27 meetings, 27 packages, 49 packages. The result, where is the result? Why Russians still, through Kazakhstan, Iran, Emirates, from different countries, they receive these components? Why? Somebody asked it. I understand, we are not omnipotent, but still, where's the... Next, there's a lack of understanding in Europe and also in US that Russian, Iranian military cooperation, it's a real threat to Europe, to Israel, and the whole Western world. Full stop. But there's a lack of understanding. Why still there's nothing from European side against Iran? All drones, missiles, all these kind of weapons serve Russia, and they will continue this war because also in North Korea, yes? And they will continue this war because they have this support. And this is I would not use the terminology like excess of evil, but it is like a excess of evil between Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China also sometimes participated in and sometimes not. It's also an issue, a very important issue, and in Israel we understand it.
So what's your solution? If sanctions are the answer?
Solution that we look in the beginning of 90s, we were very naive. Our thought was in a 3, 2, 4 years, Russia will be a democratic country.
It's not really a solution.
It's not quite a solution.
Yes, everything will be okay. I remember I visited the head of the Vladimir region. It's a region near Moscow. Nice city, historical Russian city. It was in the January 1993. And after 2 or 3 words, he said me, we have received instruction from Moscow to be Democrats. Till today. So this is the issue. We have to be realistic. And that's the issue. we have the matter with evil. It's not enough to talk. It's not enough to remember the attempts of Western countries, of Germany, France, in the 2-3 weeks of the beginning of the war, to talk to Putin. What was the result? Zero.
Can I?
So I mean, if you're saying we might need a deal with the devil, as it were, I wanted to throw this to Marie and Pavel, actually. Is how do we get Putin to the table? He certainly doesn't appear interested in any realistic negotiations. And what might, all wars end in some kind of settlement? What might that settlement look like? Some of you may have seen there was an interesting article written the other day by a sort of liberal member of the Russian elite, Konstantin Remchukov, which is supposed to be the sort of Kremlin dovish line on the war. And basically what he says is, okay, we recognize that Ukraine is a country now. We don't really need any more territory. We want the Donbass and what we have in Kherson and Zaporizhia, and that's kind of enough. But Zelensky has to go because a government like Zelensky's is a threat. And if that's the liberal position, it's very hard to see Ukraine and its Western allies making any kind of deal with that. So how do you see, firstly, how could those talks even happen? And what could some sort of settlement even look like?
Do you want to go? Well, first, I wish very much that we don't drift away from the topic of this panel that we organized, which is on Russia, what's happening in Russia, decision-making, the big disparities among the elites. I'm talking not about the ruling group, what I call the sort of the black clans or whatever. And so I think this is what we've been missing, is a much closer study and better critical understanding of what's happening inside this country, right? So let's not drift away to Yeltsin, to sanctions. It's not a panel on sanction. We just had it before. So first, a reminder is that we did build this panel, of course, on the assumption that there is only one solution where we are fully responsible, we the allies of Ukraine, is to step up military support as much as possible, put much more money on the table, more armaments, and if need be, personnel, whether it's not boots, but military technician, engineer. The Ukrainians need to have us with them, and physically, and every day. And all of us, we have now to put aside our national interest or our national defense, and we have not yet reached this stage. So this is, you see, all the rest, like economic sanctions, it is part of the pressure on those elites, on those industries, or people outside Russia that still, hope for Russia to continue the war. Nobody expects, I don't think, not even in Iran or in China, that Putin can win anything. But they are getting benefits from this war of attrition. And also, if we show more indecision and weakness, it's good for those people. This is the topic of today, right? This is the topic of today. So it's up to us to make it possible for the Ukrainian army, with our direct support. It's going to come. We didn't wake up in 2022, so now we have to go all the way to show not only to the Ukrainians, but to the Russian army and all the countries around, that we are there. We will not let Ukraine fall. This is it. To do this, we know what we have to do, but it's now. It's not tomorrow. And I'm afraid what we've been hearing yesterday, and I didn't hear the political and the strategic will. Now, if this is said, briefly about your question, what to do. Of course, there cannot be any negotiation with Putin. It's not possible. The man is not able to negotiate. He never wanted to negotiate it. It's been years. He is a very paranoid man. He lives in fear. He doesn't listen to the advice of his closer people. He has to fight till the end. You know, he knows that if he has to withdraw his troops after the very heavy casualties, he's falling also. So if some people think that there can be any negotiation with the aggressor today, that's a huge mistake. But if we can go for what I would call war conferences with the allies, with the Ukrainians, as we did during the Second World war conferences, not peace conferences, because peace is not at hand, and peace has very different meanings depending on who talks about peace. You know, let's forget about peace. Let's talk about what's going on. What's going on is war. It's war, so we need war talks amongst ourselves. That's absolutely clear. And we need to push for more and more, to make the crisis inside Russia, all the cracks that I observed with all my Russian colleagues, whether they still live in Russia or outside. We do our work every day about this. The cracks are there. We have to make sure that the cracks grow bigger. And there will be a moment when there will be, you know, such an exhaustion inside this dark tunnel with no exit, that decision might be made outside the Kremlin walls in Russia. And in particular, I'm thinking of, you know, military commanders. It's not people. Final word, I'm sorry, I know I'm being a little too long. We keep talking about the army. It's not just the army fighting. Let's not forget, it's a Cheka regime, right? FSB troops, GRU troops, the administration in occupied territory, it's full of FSB people. This is what we're fighting against. You know, we have to be very aware of this. So it's the whole system, you know, that really is at war in Ukraine and with us, and that what needs to be taken down. And the Ukrainians are, you know, fighting with this huge mission, and we have to be part of that mission.
Okay, Pavel, do you want to jump in on that?
Yes.
I have no disagreement with Marie whatsoever, but I want to kind of take a bit of different look at that and say that Putin is confident that he has transformed his regime, which used to be a kind of corrupt authoritarianism, and now it is militarized autocracy.
Yeah.
And it looks very stable.
And Czechist autocracy.
Well, yes, but war dictates many features of this regime. And you look at the personnel, so to say, at the top elite, and they're all the same people. You know, quite old, entirely corrupt, not at all natural warriors, many of them. You know, the same people around Putin, the same oligarchs around him, the same top brass, so to say. It's not just Gerasimov and his deputies. You look at the chief of the General Staff Academy, who was there for 15 years probably. The large part of this regime is the same, and they're not really people who are able to reinvent themselves for the demands of the long war of attrition.
And they're not getting any younger either, are they?
Absolutely, yes. And age is an important factor here, definitely. all those top brass are really past the age where you would expect a general to retire, and they are not, and Putin is in no rush to reshuffle them. There are reshuffles going on the level of commanders of the military districts and grouping of forces, quite a lot and quite chaotic, very difficult to find logic there. But on the level of the top elites, and I'm reluctant to say Putin's circle because there are so many different circles there, but the stability in the ranks is remarkable because the war creates a different reality. The war creates a lot of pressure. The war brings up a lot of different demands. And in principle, logically, you would say that when the transition is so much driven by one person on the top, by the decider, and what underpins his drive is the perception that Russia, step by step, is advancing, that the long war is going Russia's way. But the war is full of surprises. It's always changing. It's always evolving. It's not a kind of stable situation on the battlefield at all. And we saw that at Kursk, just a little episode, and the shock it produced. And before that, we saw that with the Prigozhin's mutiny and kind of another shock. We will see another one, and probably more than one. One thing we're certain about, it will not be more of the same. War keeps bringing up surprises, and the system each time is shocked. It's not, this regime is not suited for dealing with surprises. On one or another of them, suddenly we will discover that Putin is gone. This way or that way, but most of the people who are kind of there will still be there. Will it be worse with them? I don't think it will be worse. They are really not interested in the long war perspective. They will try to get out of that. And it will not be a peace deal. It will be a very odd and peculiar process of compromise on this and compromise on that, of ceasefire here and a bit of lifting of sanctions there. I think that's what we need to prepare for.
So thank you very much. So Dirk, I want to bring you back in here because when we talk about pressure on the regime and who might be able to sway Putin, Arkady made the good point that Western leaders they are not talking to Russia, and they haven't spoken to Putin for years. Just recently, there are reports in the German press that Olaf Scholz or people in his office were thinking about it, and they abandoned this idea, and Russia didn't really want to do it anyway. And who he is talking to is countries like China, India. Next week they're having the BRICS summit in Russia, which is a sort of major thing when Xi and Modi and others are there. That Putin can point to that and say, "I'm not isolated. I'm not under international pressure." The leaders of countries that are made up of billions of people are here in Kazan with me. How do you see in your efforts to bring pressure on Russia and win the war? Where do you see Western countries' roles with those third countries in the global South? And do you think there's a way to try to leverage that to get them to put more pressure on Putin?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to agree with everything that was said before. I think to talk to Putin is hopeless. He has a mission. He sees himself on a mission that he has to succeed. He has to see himself in the role of Piotr I or whatever that he has quoted on numerous occasions. So I think to talk to him, first thing, is probably fairly useless at this moment. Secondly, we should still not think that this is Putin's war. It is the war of not of a whole people. It's a Russian war. And you see the surveys, they might not be accurate entirely in a dictatorship, of course, done, but still you have a clear majority of Russians who are still, after so many victims, they're still behind this war. So I think there's more needs to be done. Now, who can talk to who can influence Russia maybe not by verbal persuasion, but by others. Indeed, you have mentioned China, and I think also that China has a pivotal role in this, and they have been the big profiteers so far of this war. Let's be honest. They have profited from the energy redistribution from the west to direction China. They're paying, I think, a third of the price or something like this that we were able or were willing to pay for Russian gas and Russian oil. Luckily, the infrastructure doesn't work so well. The second pipeline doesn't seem to come about so quickly. But they set the conditions. China sets the conditions. So they profit of the current state of affairs. In fact, they are not interested in either side winning. They are interested in keeping the status quo in a way. And that is, of course, something which worries us. We are speaking, of course, to the Chinese counterparts also on the EU level. We make them aware that they can either play a very positive role by bringing Russia to reason and to stop this war, or they can be made part of this war package. And the latest developments do not really give us so much hope, because we see more and more deliveries of dual-use goods from China to Russia. I read that 80% of all dual-use goods that Russia imports these days come from China. So it shows that they play an important part. They officially, of course, give the impression as if they were part of the solution. They have just recently launched a counter-peace initiative in the margins of the UN General Assembly. You will have seen this together with Brazil. It has received some attention, but of course we have said very clearly, while we are not refusing any peace initiative as such, but there was no mentioning of any UN-related stipulations. So, and of course the Ukrainians were not part of this. So that's the first thing. No plan without Ukraine. That's the must. BRICS, you mentioned one word on this still. I think BRICS will be very important, very interesting to observe, because Russia is abusing its role as presidency of BRICS this year for political reasons, although BRICS is in the first place supposed to be an economic interchanging place. From what I read, 32 countries have agreed to come, so both BRICS members, but also BRICS Plus and others who have not been part of it at all. 24 on head of state or government level. So it is clear that Russia will try to make Kazan into a political statement of an alternative world to the so-called Western world. So we have to be careful, but we also know that not everybody of those who go to Kazan are convinced that this is a good idea. Some want to keep it in the old format, even some of the old BRICS members. So we'll see. But anyway, China can play a very important role, and we are talking to them, and we hope that China will realize that they could even become a very positive counterpart if they would be able to work positively on the Russian leadership to stop this war.
Thank you very much. So we've got 8 minutes to go, and I don't want to overrun and keep you from lunch. So how many questions do we have in the audience? We have quite a lot, so let's go straight to those. Who has a question for Arkady? Does anyone have a question for Arkady?
No questions to Arkady.
I think let's collect all the questions.
Why don't we collect 2 or 3 questions? And so who has, is there a microphone, or I'll ask my Nikkei colleague to stand up and he can go first.
Thank you, Hiroakita Nikkei from Tokyo. Thank you. My question is about the future of Russia-China relation and how sustainable it is, because China is 10 times bigger demographically and 8 times bigger in the terms of GDP. So if their marriage of convenience, their balance of power of their marriage is so one-sided. If it is family, it is not sustainable. There's going to be an internal fight. So I wonder if you can tell us the end game of China and Russia relation in coming years or decade. Thank you.
Great. Now the gentleman in front of you. Sorry. Oh, and then the lady behind you.
Thanks. Ian Bond from the Centre for European Reform. So it is a question to Arkady. It seemed at the beginning of this war that Israel was doing everything possible to stay on the fence, despite the fact that, as far as I know, Ukraine was the only other country in the world with a Jewish president, and I think also a Jewish prime minister. Now that you have seen the extent of the ties between Russia and Iran, is there any reconsideration of that position? Particularly, perhaps as you have started to achieve your objectives in Gaza and Lebanon, are we going to see Israel being more supportive of Ukraine rather than sitting on the fence?
Thank you for your...
Let's answer those 2 questions, and then we'll take another one.
Okay.
Yes, but we'll answer those 2 questions first.
May I?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. I am in opposition to the Israeli government attitude toward Russia. The same is in Europe, and I will explain. It's something on the psychological level. It's a fear that Russia will do something, that Russian beer will do something that we can't believe. And this is psychological fear, the same in Europe and the same in Russia. The problem is with Taurus. The problem is Ukrainian army, and I agree with Marie, only weapon, and only the opportunity to use it in Russian territory against Russian military bases. There is no other way. There's no other way against Hezbollah. There's no other way against Hamas. But the fear in Israeli government, the fear in Europe, in Germany, in France, in other countries, that Russia will do something. What's the problem? Leopard, do you remember red lines of Putin? If Germany will supply Leopards, it's a red line. What happened? Zero. Nothing. F-16. Jets. It's a very important weapon. Something happened, red line. Don't. We afraid. And something psychological. It's not something rational. And we have to change our attitude. The only thing that Putin understands is power. Russia, I only want to say only one remark is so. I met a few weeks ago in Israel in our institute in INSS. We do some meetings with foreign diplomats. And I decided to do something unusual. I asked, what is your first association when I say Russia? And to give them the opportunity to feel more informal as diplomats. That was, the rule was Chatham House rules. So I said, look, I will start. Russia, for me, first association is evil. And then they started. No one said even once, Russia is a superpower. So why are we afraid?
Okay, and do you want to take the China question?
Yeah.
Or, try to make it quick, and then we can take one more question.
Russia-China relations, I think that's also a little bit anybody's guess. I think it also depends on the outcome of the war of Russia against Ukraine. But in the main place, I think it will be China defining the continuation and the end of this, or of this relationship, not Russia. That is clear. Russia is the subordinated partner to China in this. It's very clear. It has become even much clearer since the last 2.5 years. So it will be up to China to define how far they want to go. As I said before, China can play a constructive role if they wish so. They could help the whole world by influencing Russia in a positive way. Whether they will do it, up to anybody's guess. I don't know it. For the time being, they're profiting very much from the current relationship, and I'm sure that China will be interested in keeping this energy relationship where they get gas and oil to very favorable prices at very limited costs, and of course the Chinese economy is still growing, so they will need more in the future, and the only country that can deliver this right now is Russia, so they will try to keep this probably, but as I said, I think it will also depend on the overall situation in the war as such. It will also depend on China's behavior in the future vis-à-vis Taiwan. I think also that plays a role, and the role in the region. So, but for the foreseeable future, I don't foresee any changes in the relationship. That would be my personal guess.
Okay, 2 very quick questions and then 2 very quick answers if we have the microphone.
We have 3 hands up.
Yes, but
yeah.
do we have time for 3?
Yes, yes.
Okay, whoever gets the microphone first. Lady over here. Very quickly, please.
My name is Geraldine, and I'm from Liberia. I listened to you, ma'am. You talk about the Russian troops are exhausted, and that. But I don't know whether you know that Russia is trying to put her footstep in Africa. And when you look at West Africa with the issue of coups and counter-coups, where a lot of ex-combatants are, and you see even in Africa, you see most of Africans trying to cross the sea looking for greener pastures. Don't you think there's a need that there's a means that Russia is trying to recruit from Africa, if not to win the war with Ukraine, but just to delay your efforts?
Maybe Pavel, 30 seconds.
All right. I think Russia is trying to resort to its very traditional approaches of manipulating conflicts in Africa, but it doesn't have sufficient resources for that. Wagner Group was a very important resource. I don't think it can be replaced. And I think step by step we see Russians' attempts to kind of play on these instabilities will become less and less productive. And it very much goes against China's interests, which, by the way, wants Africa much more stable and predictable.
Okay, and then the next question. Very quickly.
Thank you. My name is Irena Krasnoshtan. I'm from Ukraine. I wanted to build on a point that Madame Marie mentioned about cracks in Russia. Can I ask each speaker to briefly identify what you consider the weakest point of Russia at this point of time, and how can we exploit it?
That was going to be my last question, so that is an excellent question to end on. Every speaker, starting with Arkady.
Shall we take the other?
Oh, is there another question?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to save that one for last, and then take this question. First. Very quickly, please, because we're already...
I would like to go back to the psychology of the fair, because what I see really lacking among European leaders, that is the work with their countries' populations, because they do not explain what exactly war in Ukraine means for Europeans, that this is also about our future. Closer you are to the border with Russia and Belarus, you understand it, like we in Latvia, in Finland, and so on. Farther you go, reaching Atlantic Ocean, yes, theoretically they understand, but they don't speak about it. And this is something what I want to ask, I don't know who will answer, how to incite this political will also to communicate in a proper way about the consequences of that war for our future, for everybody's future.
Marie, maybe that one's for you, 30 seconds, and then we'll say how and why Russia's cracking very quickly to wrap up.
Yes, thank you for this question. It's so important. When I teach, I always tell my students, when you start studying a conflict, a war, the major factor you have first to study is people, human beings, displaced people, refugees. This is absolutely key. And last night I had a long conversation with several of our young military from Ukraine present here, and I'd like to pay tribute to them. So important to talk to them. And that's exactly the question they've been asking me. How can you explain to people in France and in Europe that every hour somebody dies in Ukraine? Because we have a sense that your elites and your societies don't understand this. And I think they are right, and I think we all have to focus on this. Do as much as we can to explain that this is not just something on the map, or it is human being killed, being injured, being deported. So yes, thank you for this.
And let's wrap up by answering the question of our panel. Is Russia cracking under pressure, and how? So everyone, very quickly, yes or no, and just one reason, how or why.
The problem is that in my opinion, Russian regime is still stable, unfortunately. But this is true, and we have to be very realistic. Of course, Russian army is a problem, and Russian economy. But there's still Russian resilience, and still they can suffer as long as we can think about it. 20 years, they will suffer 20 years. They will drink vodka, and everything will be okay.
Okay, so that's a no. Pavel?
I think a couple of years from now in this conference, people armed with the wisdom of hindsight will tell the so-called Russia expert were never able to predict how Russia will crack under pressure and collapse. And I think the weakest point in the Russian war machine is the quality of leadership.
All right, so it's 1-1. Marie?
Yes. I would like to challenge this assumption that was made earlier, that there is popular support for the war and that there is an opinion and that there are surveys. It is a military dictatorship. Public opinion cannot exist when public institutions don't exist, when freedom of information doesn't exist. Those surveys are not surveys. They are certainly not polls representative of anything. If you ask me, I can go on for hours because this is one of my big topics. So you see, we cannot study the Russian system and Russian society of today the way we did 10 years ago. This is finished. And as long as you don't have evidence of millions of people applauding the war, happy to send their sons getting killed, without then I think we should stop conveying the Russian disinformation.
So Russia is cracking under pressure.
No, I don't know what Russia you're talking about. Russia doesn't exist. Russia is not a person. It's not going to crack. What is cracking, as Pavel said, is just, you can talk about the military structure. You can talk about the economic, wealthy upper class. But then half of them have emigrated. Do you know how many million people have left the Federation of Russia since 2010? Where the assessment is at least 7 million, you know, in those years. So we also have, and I think I'd like to conclude on this very positive note, is that we have hundreds of thousands of well-read, very European at heart people from Russia, they're not all Russians, I insist, who are fighting, are resisting the war, opposing the war, resisting the regime from inside and from outside, you know? And those two resistance, the one outside and the one inside, they are now working much more closely together, and they are asking for our support, right? And we have to work with them because they are, you know, the future Russia. You know, the future Russia will very much depend on them. And I think we need to work with them.
Okay, and very final thoughts from you there.
Yeah, while the regime indeed appears to be stable, I think, but let me remind you of...
But stable in war. When
exactly. Let me remind you of Prigozhin last year. It could have cracked in a blink of an eye, this whole system, if it hadn't stopped for the reasons that we hopefully will find out one day concretely. But I think the weakest point is still the population. It is, if you have your population under control, under a whole avalanche of legislation, be it foreign agents, be it extremism, be it fake news or the likes, and you act only with this factor of fear, which is very visible in the Russian society, it cannot work out for eternally, I think. So I think sooner or later, and also with a deterioration of the economic situation for the middle class, the poorer class is not used to anything better, but for the middle class, I think hopefully this combination will one day lead to the real crackdown.
All right, thank you so much. You've been very patient as we've run over time. I don't want to keep you from lunch, so let's have another round of applause for our great panelists and for the organizers.